Disaster can strike an unsuspecting aircraft for many different reasons. When it does, no one wants it to happen. But that's not always the case. Some incidents that air investigators are called to solve turn out to be deliberate. These are the disasters that someone, somewhere, wanted to happen.
This is a public safety announcement. For your protection, never leave your personal belongings, carry-on baggage, or parcels unattended for any reason. Also, never take another person's baggage or packages onto an aircraft with you. Report anything questionable to the nearest airline employee or airport police officer. Thank you.
When deliberate damage to aircraft is suspected, the air investigators play second fiddle to the criminal detectives. That's what happened on December the 7th, 1987, when 43 people took off on Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771 from Los Angeles. It was due in San Francisco at 4:43, but it never arrived. Putting together the puzzle of what happened to Flight 1771 was to shock even the most grizzled detectives.
Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us on this Monday, December 7th. We have lots to tell you about, and we will lead off with what is apparently a plane which has crashed near Templeton this evening. The plane went down about 4:25, we understand, and we have no confirmation.
Well, I'm the sheriff, coroner, and marshal of San Luis Obispo County, an area of 3,300 square miles. Well, on the way to the crash site, we received information that there was possibly gunshots involved. I assumed that maybe gunshots were from the ground up.
The first detective to arrive at the scene was Bill Wammock.
I couldn't comprehend at first that this was something larger than perhaps a small single-engine private aircraft. And I kept thinking perhaps he was carrying newspapers. It just seemed to be nothing but papers blowing gently in the wind, hanging in the trees. The thought never occurred to me that it was actually bits and pieces of a large aircraft, a commercial aircraft, bits and pieces of passengers' luggage, and in some cases bits and pieces of a human being.
The plane came down about 10 degrees over vertical at about 720 miles an hour when it hit the ground.
There was nothing that had any shape to it that was recognizable. Most things torn and jagged, small pieces. In the most cases, no larger than a man's hand.
We found personal belongings, driver's licenses, credit cards, pictures of family members. We put them in plastic bags, labeled them with the grid area which we were searching, and turned that over to the coroner.
Parts of bodies would be placed in one bag, any evidence or parts of a plane that they thought was of some significance placed in another.
On the second day of the search, investigators made a vital find. Amongst the millions of tiny pieces of wreckage was what looked like the trigger and barrel of a handgun.
On the morning of December 9th, an FBI agent located that gun in the tree area behind me, and I was at the time standing at that tree. He brought it to my attention without disturbing it. I stepped over to where he was located, and we did confirm that it was what appeared to be a .44 Magnum stainless steel handgun.
But who did the gun belong to? The way the detectives found out was remarkable.
In the serration of the trigger, we found that there had been an accumulation of skin, as if the gun had been ripped from the index finger area, and some skin had been included in those ridges.
The tissue was rolled out, flattened out, to see if we could find fingerprint ridges, thumbprint ridges, palm prints, anything we could possibly identify to somebody's known fingerprints.
Meanwhile, the FBI had been checking the passenger manifest of those who'd boarded Flight 1771. On that list was a man named David Burke, whose fingerprints were on file.
We were able to determine that that skin was in fact the fingerprint of Mr. Burke.
Now investigators had a suspect and a weapon, but they still needed a motive. The FBI soon discovered one. Burke had been fired by the airline just 2 weeks earlier.
David Burke was terminated for stealing $69 from the aircraft cocktail fund that the flight attendants maintained. He appealed his termination and had a hearing scheduled on December the 7th, which is the day of this incident, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon before Ray Thompson, who was his supervisor. And at that time, David Burke learned that his appeal was not being granted. As he left the office, the secretary to Ray Thompson at the time remarked to David Burke, in an effort to ease, I believe, the tension that was in the office, "Will David have a good day," or words to that effect. And he paused upon leaving and looked at her and said, "I intend to have a very good day."
With that, Burke went to buy a ticket for Flight 1771 to San Francisco, a flight he knew his boss, Ray Thompson, traveled home on daily. And with his ticket in his hand, Burke went off to get his gun.
David Burke smuggled the gun on the aircraft using his identification as an airline employee to circumvent the security and allow him entry into the secure area with a weapon. And that identification was found at the scene of the crash.
This is the kind of gun used by Mr. Burke that he took on the airplane and fired it in a very confined place. This is a .357 Magnum. He used a .44 Magnum, but in all other respects, they're exactly the same.
During our investigation on the scene of the crash, we recovered a air sickness bag. And on that bag was written a note, obviously addressed to Ray, we believe Ray Thompson.
I was startled by that because things were blowing all over the place, as I said, 7-8 miles away in a very large area. And we had what appeared to be millions of pieces of paper out there.
And the note we have determined, the laboratory, the FBI Identification Division has determined was written by David Burke. The letter, or the note, said, "Hi, Ray. It's kind of ironical, isn't it, that we end up like this? I asked for leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none."
What finally allowed the detectives to piece together the last moments of Flight 1771 was the discovery amongst the wreckage of the cockpit voice recorder, the so-called black box. After overnight analysis in Washington, the tape was rushed back to the crash site.
When we got the tape back from the contents of the black box, I was out on the scene and we found a car that had a tape player in it. So several of us, the head of the FBI and others, sat to see what had happened in that cockpit.
Through the analysis of the voice recorder, we heard the door to the restroom right next to Ray Thompson open and close just seconds before the first shots were overheard. We believe that Ray probably received the note from David Burke as David Burke went to the restroom, and that he then came out of the restroom with his revolver unsheathed, and that he immediately shot Ray Thompson.
The next thing that you could hear on the tape was a door opening and a female voice saying something to the words of "there's a problem." You could hear either the captain or the co-pilot ask what the problem is. You could hear another male voice say something to the effect of "I'm the problem."
And then there are additional gunshots.
The conclusion that we've come to is that Mr. Burke entered the cockpit and executed both the pilot, the co-pilot.
And then there is the sound of the plane increasing in speed as it's heading toward the ground. Obviously, Mr. Burke has got the controls at this point, and then all of a sudden there is an additional gunshot, and then there is dead silence.
I can't imagine being a passenger on that airplane, knowing that this man had just fired a shot, and then knowing that you're hearing another shot, and then knowing that the plane is going down, and you have no time to even lean over to your loved one and say, "I love you."
From the time the first shots were heard until the time of impact of this aircraft hitting the ground, approximately 47 seconds elapsed. Those were 47 terror-filled seconds to the passengers aboard Flight 1771.
This entire incident took place because Mr. Burke was fired for stealing $69. It was a mass murder. It was a suicide. It was a plane crash. It seems like a very significant disparity between $69 and the loss of this aircraft and 43 people.
Can you just bring your arm around? Yeah.
In the early 1970s, explosives expert Walter Korsgaard was asked to set up a counter-bombing unit for the body which regulates America's flying industry, the Federal Aviation Administration.
Part of my job there was making speeches around the country. And in the process, while I'm talking about the bombers, I would build a device to show how anybody could do it. I would buy all the components right in the town where I was. And little by little, it would come together. And of course, what I would attempt to do would be to set the clock, the timer, if you will, so that the bomb would go off. Of course, not like a regular bomb, but with a good flash and a little booming and some smoke to get the audience's attention.
In the late 1980s, Walter Korsgaard was to be a key figure in solving the puzzle of one of the most enduring tragedies in civil aviation. On December the 21st, 1988, a Pan Am 747 came down over the small town of Lockerbie in Scotland. Pan Am 103 was on its way from Heathrow to New York City. As it reached its cruising altitude of 31,000 feet, a bomb the size of a sugar bag blew the jumbo jet from the sky. Minutes later, all 259 people on board and 11 people on the ground were dead. No suspect has been tried for those murders. The question, why not, is the one most despairingly asked today. But that wasn't the first question facing investigators a decade ago.
At 4 o'clock in the morning, I got this phone call. The instruction was to go to the scene at Lockerbie and use my experience and knowledge to try and decide whether this crash was accidental or whether in actual fact it was a result of a criminal act. The debris and carnage caused by this accident stretched for 800 square miles, and in fact 2 separate trails of debris were determined during the investigation. These trails had a gap of between 2 and 3 miles between them. This is Thundergarth Church and Graveyard, and it's opposite the church in the field over the wall that the great nose cone of the Jumbo 747 landed on the Wednesday night. On the Thursday, I came up with my team. The nose cone was there, rescuers were there, the media were there, and I took time to enter the nose cone, which was quite vast, and sad to record, many of the crew were still in their places within the nose cone.
In Lockerbie, speculation was at fever pitch. How could a jumbo jet just fall out of the sky? Was it accidental or deliberate? The 747 was old, one of the first to be built. It had flown 72,000 hours and completed over 16,000 flights. The fear that a structural failure of the world's largest airliner was responsible for the carnage in Lockerbie played on the minds of detectives and air investigators arriving in the traumatized town.
The scene that greeted me on arrival at Lockerbie was the most harrowing scene I have ever witnessed. We were told, first and foremost, that we were to search for bodies, and we were to do it in a thorough and dignified manner. Secondly, we were then to search for personal belongings, and thirdly, we were to search for pieces of aircraft.
Distressing as it was, the search for clues began with the bodies of the dead. The bodies were taken to a temporary mortuary in the town, where a team of pathologists waited to examine them.
It is essential that you investigate the bodies, you look at the bodies thoroughly to pick up clues, perhaps even trace evidence of what actually happened, and from that, helping to reconstruct what actually took place. For example, if somebody was in direct contact with the bomb or very close to it, there might have been primary missile injuries. Bits of the bomb, bits of the circuitry perhaps, would have been embedded in people who were sitting in the seats above the bomb or sitting close to the bomb.
But the examination of the bodies gave up no clues, and the frantic search for evidence now turned to the aircraft debris. This is the home territory of air investigators worldwide, and within 24 hours of the destruction of Pan Am 103, British air investigators had been joined by their American counterparts. Among them was the Mr. Bomb of air investigation, Walter Korsgaard, from the Federal Aviation Administration.
The first day he arrived, he was dressed in yellow oilskins. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3, Walter always arrived on scene with the yellow oilskins on. As a result of that, he was affectionately called the Banana Man.
During a lifetime of searching for and testing out explosives, the Banana Man has blown up more aircraft than terrorists, blown himself up, and been deafened in both ears. The moment he set foot in Lockerbie, he wanted to brief the search crews on the telltale signs of bomb damage. But this was a sensitive suggestion to the investigation manager he approached.
Politically, he didn't think it was a smart idea to start talking about bombs too early, because if it occurs and the UK government is responsible for the screening, this could be a problem. So he said, well, I'd rather not do that just now. And of course, as soon as the meeting was over, all the supervisors that were going to run these search lines got me off to one side and said, hey, what are we really looking for? And I said, well, you know, you come down to the room and we'll go over it. So we ran a little private seminar.
Korsgaard showed the search chiefs his little traveling collection, bits of bombed aircraft he's investigated over the years. They all showed the telltale signs of sooting, and the distinctive jagged edges, unlike any mechanical tear.
We wanted them to look for pieces of metal with those characteristics, plus gas washing craters, which is little craters in the metal that look like a typical bomb crater, actually, but they're very tiny. But you can see them with your naked eye, usually.
Mr. Korsgaard was to be a godsend, because with his knowledge of damage to aircraft, etc., I decided that when I was out in my scientific team, he should be a member of that. And the two of us set up a great rapport as we set about trying to establish what had caused the aircraft to crash.
And so together, the Scottish forensic investigator and America's Mr. Bomb started in on the 800 square miles of crash site. That search would become one of the most thorough in the history of aircraft investigation. It was also one of the luckiest.
On about the third day after we arrived at the incident, one of the individuals on one of the search lines brought in a piece of fuselage skin, which was precisely what we were looking for. It was a piece of skin, perhaps 20 inches long, maybe 8 inches high, and it was bent toward the front of the airplane and had stayed there rather than bending back. If it were a mechanical breakdown of the airplane, pieces will splay out just like in an explosion, but they fold back in. In this case, with a bomb, it won't happen that way. When you think about it, the airplane is flying at 33,000 feet. It's probably 30 below zero or colder, and yet here it is hit by a bomb and the ball, the fireball, at about 5,000 to 8,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it swings out into that cold air and it freezes there, you might say.
And just as with Korsgaard's collection, that vital piece of Pan Am 103 had the sooting, the jagged edge, and the gas-washing craters, the telltale signs of explosion.
At this point, on day 3, Walter Korsgaard and myself knew without any shadow of doubt that we were now dealing with a criminal act rather than an accidental crash.
We took that piece of metal directly to the individual in charge of the overall management of the incident and explained to him that if he had it tested by a lab, he would surely find that it was in fact evidence that there had been a bomb on Pan Am 103.
Some pieces of wreckage are today being taken to the Royal Armament Research and Development Establishment at Fort Halstead in Kent for more detailed examination to determine whether they exhibit evidence of a pre-impact explosion.
And they flew it down to the lab, and 9 o'clock that night we got the word back that there were explosive residues and they were gas washing craters that we were looking at, and the jagged edge was positive proof.
The destruction of Pan Am 103 was immediate, the devastation total. But contrary to popular belief, Pan Am 103 was statistically unlucky.
Yeah, most people think that any size bomb in an aircraft will probably bring it down. Actually, if you look at the record, 3/4 of turbine-powered aircraft, that is pure jet airplane, survive bombs. And that's historic.
So how was it that Pan Am 103 was blasted into 1 million pieces? To find out, the investigators decided to blow up some aircraft. It turned out that where the Lockerbie bomb had been planted was critical. The tests revealed that the forward cargo hold, where the Lockerbie bomb went off, is a particularly sensitive area in wide-bodied jets.
The way the 747 is designed, I believe, makes that airplane most vulnerable to a bomb in the cargo hold. For example, there's tremendous space between the outside walls of the cargo hold and the cargo containers themselves. And these spaces allow gases to travel and do damage in places where in another airplane they couldn't do that type of a job. This bomb was not placed in that airplane specifically in a given slot. It was randomly put in the airplane. It probably ended up in the worst possible place in the baggage hold.
The consequences of the loss of Flight 103 were huge. Pan Am went out of business, while the US government, under pressure from the families of the Lockerbie dead, spent millions building this security research laboratory. It's dedicated to preventing another Lockerbie.
Back in '89, the year following Pan Am 103 incident, I was involved in actual research testing that was done with the UK, the Scottish, the FBI, and the FAA here in the States to demonstrate the type of damage that was done in the Pan Am 103.
As a result of those tests, the FAA was set a number of targets. One was to develop equipment that could actually identify Lockerbie-sized quantities of explosives hidden in passengers' luggage. By borrowing from technology first used in hospital body scanners, researchers developed a new type of airport machine. It scans and maps a bag's contents, analyzes them, identifies any explosive and any object it's hidden in.
The system here, the CTX 5000, is designed to actually look for the bomb quantity explosive before it gets on the aircraft. We have done extensive testing, both with suitcases without explosive and suitcases with explosives, all military and commercial explosive. This bag has a two-speaker cassette radio. You'll notice that the two-speaker magnets are on the lower part of the picture. The red object is the explosive, which is concealed inside the radio cassette player. It has determined that it's a military-type explosive. The mass is approximately 900 grams, and the density is 1.4 grams per cubic centimeter.
Clever the new machine may be, but it has been bought by just a handful of airports, and most of those American. Another consequence of Lockerbie was the development of a luggage container that, should a bomb get on board, will resist the kind of blast that downed Pan Am 103.
This is an LD-3 container, which is used in nearly all wide-body aircraft, and indeed in the 747, like Lockerbie. These two units are the same size, but they're hardened containers which have been developed by the research and development money for the FAA, and they both have withstood the amount of explosive used in Lockerbie or even larger. Recently, a visit from the families of the victims of Pan Am 103, one of the gentlemen commented that if we had these containers in Pan Am 103, that his daughter could very well be alive today.
But blast-resistant containers are not in use even today. So far, they are simply prototypes. The history of crimes in the sky is littered with near misses.
Tower 3 Hotel, do you have a
The little-known story of FedEx Flight 705 is one where the outcome could have been even more destructive than at Lockerbie. In just 25 years, FedEx has built up the world's best-known pickup and delivery business. It operates over 600 aircraft, it's the world's largest cargo fleet, and from its nerve center in Memphis, employs 3,500 pilots to fly them. One of those pilots was Auburn Callaway, a 43-year-old U.S. Navy-trained flyer. In April 1994, Callaway was working as a FedEx flight engineer on the company's fleet of wide-bodied DC-10s. Richard Boyle is a Vietnam veteran who has flown for FedEx since it first took off 25 years ago. In April 1994, he was Auburn Callaway's captain. They flew together on long-haul flights across the states.
Well, Auburn didn't have a good reputation of the company because he just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I think it might have been first impressions. My first impression of Auburn wasn't a positive one either. But once I got to know him, we got along fine. But many of the captains did not like to fly with Auburn.
Callaway was not only unpopular, he was also under investigation. FedEx believed Callaway had lied to them about his Navy flying time. Callaway believed FedEx were out to get him because he was black.
He felt that he was being persecuted by one of our flight managers. He felt it was a personal vendetta. And that's one thing FedEx will not tolerate, and that's someone lying regarding their credentials. So if he lost his job at FedEx, he would never get hired by another major air carrier. I mean, his aviation career with any good company was basically over.
Fellow flyer and Memphis newspaperman Dave Hirschman discovered more about Callaway's paranoid character.
During the time that he was in the Navy, he kept a book of all the slights and all the indignities and every perceived injustice that anyone had ever perpetrated against him. And he kept that book, he kept the little black leather-bound book and added to it on an almost daily basis.
A lifetime of slights wore Callaway down. He decided to end his life. In a farewell note he wrote, "I have battle fatigue badly. It's my time to go." But Callaway had no intention of going quietly.
Callaway's plan was to knock out Federal Express. He wanted to strike at the very nerve center of this very complex, worldwide, global organization. And his method of doing that was to commandeer a DC-10, fully loaded with fuel, and to crash that airplane into the FedEx nerve center at Memphis International Airport. When you think about a 500,000-pound jet with 100,000 pounds of jet fuel on board, moving at over 350 miles per hour, and targeted at a particular location, the devastation would have been incalculable.
FedEx has a long-standing policy. Any member of staff can fly free on any FedEx flight in the aircraft's jump seat, which is right behind the pilot on the aircraft flight deck. On April the 7th, 1994, Auburn Callaway buckled himself into the jump seat of FedEx Flight 705, a DC-10 loaded with electronics for California's Silicon Valley.
Heading 310, cleared for takeoff.
The wide-bodied jet took off from runway 9 at Memphis Airport at 3:02 that afternoon. Part of Callaway's plan was for his family to benefit from the company's life insurance scheme. But to be sure the policy paid out, he needed to make his suicide attack on his employer look like an accident.
What he intended to do was to use hammers to incapacitate the crew, and you know, hammers may seem like a primitive weapon, But when you think about it, it's the perfect weapon. The wounds that they would cause would be every bit as devastating as gunshots. And later, when forensic experts examined the wreckage, they would find crew members with fractured skulls, but those injuries are totally consistent with an airline crash.
26 minutes after takeoff, at 19,000 feet, Callaway took up his hammer. Unsuspecting in the cockpit were his FedEx colleagues, Captain David Sanders, First Officer Jim Tucker, and Flight Engineer Andy Peterson.
And the first thing he does is he delivers two devastating hammer blows to Andy Peterson. Andy Peterson was seated with his back to Callaway, and he was hit twice. And the impact of these hammer blows, they fractured Peterson's skull and severed the temporal artery on the top of his scalp. Jim Tucker was turning his head to the left to ask Peterson if he could identify the noise. And at that time, he was struck with an absolutely devastating blow. The hammer is a 20-ounce Stanley framing hammer, and it actually went through his skull, right about where he would have parted his hair. The hammer went into his brain, and Tucker was immediately paralyzed on one side of his body. He was losing vision. The impact of this blow literally bounced his face off of the instrument panel in front of him. David Sanders was still strapped into his seat. He had his hands up over his head. He was moving in his seat, trying to ward off these hammer blows, and he was struck several times. One of the blows nearly severed his ear, his right ear. Callaway expected these guys to be dead from these mortal wounds that he had delivered, but instead that they were still alert and they were shouting to each other and exhorting each other to fight back.
Callaway's plan was going wrong, and he retreated from the cockpit in panic. The blood-spattered Sanders and Peterson forced themselves out of their seats and went after him. They found Callaway holding a Magnum underwater spear gun, which he'd carried on board in a guitar case.
The spear gun was his trump card, and he pointed it at Sanders, the captain, and he said, "This is a real gun, I'll kill you." And he implored them to cooperate with what he was doing. It was at this point that Tucker took the most extraordinary action.
Tucker had enough presence of mind to take the aircraft with one hand and almost turned it upside down, which threw everyone in the back on top of Robert Callaway, which gave them a little bit of an advantage. The fact he did that with a crushed skull and only half his body functioning, it's just phenomenal.
While Captain Sanders and Flight Engineer Peterson grappled with Callaway, Tucker raised the alarm.
Center, emergency. Aircraft with emergency, go ahead.
When we received the call, it just came across the frequency as emergency. So now we have the job of determining who is it that has the emergency.
Aircraft with emergency, say again. To me. Aircraft with emergency, say again.
When we questioned, aircraft with emergency, say again, well, apparently at the same time we were saying that, they were trying to call us once again. Well, as we did that, our two transmissions blocked each other out, and so all we heard was like the last UNC of emergency.
Aircraft with emergency, say again.
This time, he came back and announced that it was, FedEx 705.
Express 705. I've been wounded. We've had an attempted takeover on board the airplane. Give me a vector, please. That's to Memphis at this time. Hurry.
Last one we would have expected the emergency to come from was probably the FedEx plane.
Express 705, flying 0905, direct Memphis.
A minute or so went by, and then I got another call, and it said, "Where's the airport?"
Keep me advised, where's Memphis? Express 705, flighting of 090, and the airport's at 43 miles, 12 o'clock.
I said, "It's 12 o'clock and, so many miles." And he said, "What direction?"
Say my direction to Memphis.
Wait a second, what direction? He was westbound heading for California, and now he's pointed back at the airport and he didn't know what direction he's flying.
Express 705, you're eastbound at this time, and it'll be about 12:30, 1 o'clock. Look, just keep talking to me, okay?
Jim Tucker is using this aircraft as a weapon, and he's flying it in a way that it's never been flown before, but the purpose is to let the crew have the upper hand. He assures them that he has control of the airplane and that they should get up and resist in any way that they can.
Peterson and Saunders tried to pin Calloway to the galley floor, but their frenzied attacker was biting and lashing out with his hammer.
Okay, we need an ambulance and we need armed intervention as well. Alert the airport facility.
When I got him down as low as I thought I could talk to him without losing him on the communications equipment, I shipped him over to Memphis Approach.
Express 705, we have an emergency. He's turning back direct Memphis. He had an attempted takeover. He is wounded at this time. He's had an attempted takeover? Affirmative. He's north of Forest City by about 8 miles at this time. He's at 13,000, descending to 10,000. Okay, radar contact. And you put him on 19-1? 19-1. Yep.
By now, all three crewmen were back in the galley, struggling to overcome Calloway. No one was flying the plane.
When he told them to change frequencies, I think they had it on altitude hold, and they were all in the back in the struggle. And I had tried to call them several times.
Express 705 Heavy, Memphis, out of here. Express 705 Heavy, Memphis, out of here.
Memphis, can you hear me?
Is this Express 705 Heavy?
705, yes.
705 Heavy, Memphis, Roger. I do hear you. You can proceed direct Memphis if able. Expect runway 9er. The altimeter is 302-9er.
You understand we're declaring an emergency. We need security to meet the airplane. We'll stop it on the runway or we can.
Express 705 Heavy, affirmative. All that's been taken care of.
One of the first things you want to do in a hijacking is not make the situation any worse. You don't want to say anything that would anger the hijacker. You know, you want to ask him, hey, does the wacko have a gun? You know, and at that point, you know, it just might push him over the edge. And so you don't want to make the situation any worse, and you want to give all the assistance you can to the pilot, to the crew.
Someone had to try and get the plane down. With First Officer Tucker and Flight Engineer Peterson on top of Calloway, Saunders forced himself back into his bloodied captain's seat.
Sanders was alone in the cockpit making this maximum speed approach and landing. He was under incredible duress because this fight was still going on. It would ebb and flow, and at times the crew would think that they had the attacker under control, and then the fight would erupt all over again.
Express 705 Heavy, verify situation still under control.
Well, it's sort of under control.
As he was coming in, the aircraft was going faster, much faster than normal. There's a speed limit of 250 knots below 10,000 feet. I saw his ground speed was about 350 knots, and I figured this guy wants to get home. That type of aircraft, you have to slow it down to make it descend. Otherwise, it doesn't descend very well. So it turns out he ended up too high for that runway. And at about 4,000 feet, probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles out, that's when he said, we're not going to make runway 9. We want 36 left.
I'm coming around to 36 left.
Okay, Express 705 Heavy, runway 36 left. Clear to land. Clear visual approach 36 left. You are clear to land. The wind is 050 at 8.
All other flights into Memphis were diverted. Everyone prepared for the worst.
Dave Sanders was trying to land on runway 9, but ended up very high and very fast, was incapable of putting the aircraft down on the runway. So what he did, he broke off the approach and literally turned like a fighter to a downwind at 36 left.
The aircraft made a very high banking turn, almost perpendicular to the ground as it made final and onto final approach to the airport. Thought the aircraft was going to crash. I didn't think they could save the airplane in that configuration. The aircraft, as it made its approach, was going over a very highly populated residential area. If the airplane had crashed there, it would have been conceivably loss of life and property. It could have flown into buildings, terminal buildings, airplanes. And of particular concern to me was the very large fuel storage tanks. He hit that, it had been a huge explosion, and it had been quite a catastrophe. The pilot made a beautiful recovery, landed right on the runway, hit very hard, slammed on his brakes, and came to a complete stop.
exceptional piece of airmanship. You don't see that type of flying in a DC-10. A very nice piece of airmanship by a man who's very fatigued and very injured. It's quite phenomenal.
Paramedic David Teague was with a posse of emergency vehicles summoned the moment Flight 705 raised the alarm. He raced across the tarmac to the now stationary jet.
We pulled up beside the plane, off in the grass, off on the right wingtip.
The bloody three-man crew managed to land safely despite critical injuries.
The captain was saying, "Somebody help us, get somebody up here before he kills us all."
Paramedics found the crew and suspect Calloway covered with blood.
There was blood on the walls, on the seats that were there. Everybody in the cockpit was covered with blood. You had 4 grown men that were fighting for their lives in this confined area for about 30 or 40 minutes. Probably one of the bloodiest scenes that I've seen in my years with the fire department.
The three-man crew and one other person were aboard, an off-duty FedEx pilot, Auburn Calloway, who was just along for the ride.
By just asking, I guess out of my own curiosity, why did you do something like this? And you can just kind of tell when somebody's thinking, and he kind of had that look on his face, and after 15 or 20 seconds he said, "I guess it just went crazy."
Auburn Calloway was jailed for life. All 3 pilots survived. They won awards for their bravery, but none of them has flown again. FedEx employees are still free to fly in the jump seats of the company's aircraft. The number of hijacks and bombings throughout the 1980s sent shivers through the aviation community. Something had to be done. In America, President Reagan set up an extraordinary flying security service to protect American lives in the air. At an airport near Atlantic City, a bizarre cast of characters climbs aboard a pensioned-off aircraft. The men behind the masks are U.S. federal air marshals. They insisted on hiding their faces from our cameras. There are about 1,000 of them. They are armed and they travel as normal passengers on U.S. flights around the world. You could be sitting next to one and you'd never know. Their mission? To stop the hijackers and the bombers.
Pin is pulled!
They practice as realistically as possible. Here, trainee marshals are being tested. They've got to pick just the right moment to shoot the hijacker, while making sure they don't hit a passenger.
I told you not to look at me! Be quiet! I'll put you out of your misery! Okay. Don't move! Good.
In the last 10 years, there have been no attempts to bomb or hijack American passenger aircraft. The air marshals believe that's probably down to them. One thing is certain. In a world of bombers, hijackers, and air marshals, more people than ever carry weapons onto planes and are quite prepared to use them, with potentially deadly consequences for us all.
The Channel 4 video black box is available.
A plane takes off from Chicago Airport on a clear spring day. As the wheels leave the runway, it loses power from one of its engines. Suddenly, it rolls to the left. Seconds later, the aircraft hits the ground and disintegrates, smashing into a trailer park. 273 people are dead. Now, a team of investigators must find out exactly what went wrong in America's most catastrophic air accident. What they discover will uncover fatal shortcomings in the American aviation business and change the industry forever. Disasters don't just happen. They're a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. This man has just witnessed a plane crash. On board is the woman he loves. North America, Illinois, Chicago. May 25th, 1979, 12 noon. America's third biggest city, with the busiest airport in the world. Every minute, a plane lands or takes off from O'Hare International Airport. More than 2,000 flights a day. This is one of the most crowded airspaces in the world. On its final approach to O'Hare is an American Airlines DC-10, flying in from Phoenix, Arizona. At the controls is 53-year-old Captain Walter Lux. Walter has worked for American Airlines for 29 years and completed over 22,000 flying hours.
Welcome to Chicago, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for flying American Airlines.
It's 1:30 p.m. and Walter prepares to go off duty when a fellow pilot approaches him. The colleague has to attend a family function and asks Walter whether he'll swap shifts and take flight 191 to Los Angeles that afternoon. Walter has to think hard. It's the Friday before Memorial Day holiday weekend, and Walter is looking forward to the break. He lives in Phoenix, but this weekend he plans to stay in the family holiday home in the Chicago area with his son Michael.
It's a neat little house in between two lakes that my dad has purchased way back in 1959. Usually we're out on the water, either fishing or sailing.
The request will mean Walter changing his plans. But he also knows he can call for a return favor in the future.
I'll see you soon. Back we go again, huh? Let's go.
There's no time to let his son Michael know about the change. He'll have to call him from LA. Already, passengers are checking in for Flight 191. 21-year-olds Deborah Ann Maruzzi and Doreen Malik are going on the holiday of a lifetime to Hawaii. Debbie's boyfriend, Ray DeVito, sees them off.
Yeah. I'm thinking what a great day it was and just how wonderful it is to be able to just hop in a plane and fly to Hawaii. They were going to land in LA and then take off in LA off to Hawaii. I was just caught up in their excitement as well.
At 2 p.m., Captain Walter Lux hooks up with his co-pilot, Captain James Dillard, another experienced pilot. They'll be flying a DC-10 to Los Angeles. McDonnell Douglas launched the DC-10 in the early 1970s as its own long-haul wide-body jet to rival Boeing's 747. Both McDonnell Douglas and American Airlines rely on the DC-10 to assure their future at a time of turbulence in U.S. aviation. The previous year, in 1978, the industry was deregulated, and established carriers like American Airlines expect to face cutthroat competition for passengers. But the DC-10 is a plane with a troubled history. Since 1971, there have been 3 fatal accidents in which 349 people have died. The worst was in 1974 in Paris, when a Turkish Airlines DC-10 crashed just after takeoff. A cargo door blew off, leading to catastrophic loss of pressure. 346 people died. Nevertheless, the DC-10 and its cutting-edge flight control systems are popular with pilots, including Walter Lux.
He thinks it's a great airplane. He's became a captain on it. Great airplane, especially in the weather in Chicago. February, March, big snowstorms, when a lot of other airplanes might have to divert.
Flight 191 is one of the oldest DC-10s in service. It's flown nearly 20,000 hours since 1972. But the plane recently had a major service. It was given the all clear. At 2:30 p.m., Deborah and Doreen are among the passengers taking their seats. The flight attendants know they'll be busy. It's a holiday weekend, and the plane is almost full. A final count confirms that all 258 passengers are on board. 2:45 p.m. 49-year-old James Dillard will pilot the plane at takeoff and landing.
Engine anti-ice.
This is the first time he's flown the route from Chicago to LA. But for a pilot with more than 1,000 hours flying DC-10s, it shouldn't be a problem. It's just before 3 p.m.
Chicago Tower. American 191 K5, ready for taxi.
American 191 Heavy. Proceed to 32 right via the bridge.
O'Hare Control Tower clears the DC-10 to push back and taxi to runway 32R. Air traffic controller Ed Rucker monitors 191's progress.
American 191 Heavy. Monitor tower on 118.1.
Ray DeVito watches from the observation deck.
I was first mesmerized by the sheer beauty of this airplane. Beautifully finished in a very high gloss, shining aluminum finish. Thinking, you know, how does this thing even fly?
At 3:01 p.m., 191 pauses for an incoming plane.
32 right, position and hold.
All right.
A minute later, it's cleared for takeoff.
0, clear for takeoff. 32 right, no delay. American 191, on our way.
In standard pilot procedure, both Dillard and Lux move the throttle forward.
V1.
The wing slats are extended to increase the plane's lift. Within 50 seconds, the 170-ton DC-10 reaches takeoff speed.
Rotate.
But just as co-pilot Dillard eases the plane's nose into the sky, he notices he's lost power from engine 1 on the left wing.
Damn.
Ed Rucker watches from the control tower.
We need equipment. We blew up an engine.
Flight 191 is in trouble. But it's too late for the pilots to abort takeoff. They are now committed.
Loss number 1.
American Airlines Flight 191 has just taken off from Chicago Airport. As it leaves the ground, it loses power from the engine on the left wing. The plane veers to the left, but co-pilot James Dillard corrects it with the rudder. He knows the DC-10 can fly with just 2 of its 3 engines and has been trained to deal with exactly this scenario. To reduce the load on the 2 remaining engines, Dillard follows AA guidelines and slows the plane to the minimum climbing speed, V2, 283 kilometers per hour. Air traffic control hurriedly make preparations for the DC-10 to return for an emergency landing.
All right, American 191 Heavy. Do you want to come back? And to what runway?
The pilots know the emergency is far from over, but they have the plane climbing evenly again, though slightly slower than normal. Just beyond the airport's runway are a trailer park and the Chicago Police Canine Training Facility. Sergeant Ken Berger has been training dog teams in search and pursuit techniques for 17 years. Today's training exercise involves Ken playing a fugitive.
I can hear a plane approaching. The engine is backfiring. It's sputtering. It's nearing.
Suddenly, just 20 seconds after leaving the ground, Flight 191 is in desperate trouble. Without warning, the plane starts to roll to the left. Ray DeVito is still on the observation deck. He watches in horror.
There are two fireballs, like flak from a World War II movie. Two big bangs with a red flash fire, and then it begins to roll over.
Within seconds, the aircraft banks dramatically to the left. Ken Berger and his colleagues see the plane in trouble.
As I break through the trees, the other officers in the training group are running.
The DC-10 heads directly for the trailer park, home to hundreds of people. Ray DeVito runs in panic through the airport. Pilots Lux and Dillard fight to level the aircraft, but the plane does not respond. The nose drops below the horizon. In air traffic control, Ed Rucker can do nothing but watch as the nightmare unfolds before him.